Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, viewers around the globe and across all the dimensions in the universe, welcome to this week's edition of Vinyl Countdown. My name's Dan Harding. I'm Head of Music Performance here at the University of Kent. And for anyone who hasn't seen it before, this is our, by now, weekly web show in which I invite a group of panellists live on air into the virtual studio here to battle live on air for your votes, to have their nominated album crowned Album of the Week. And the idea is that as we're going along, whatever platform you're watching on, Facebook, Twitter, or indeed YouTube, you can get involved by simply commenting in the comments or the live chat facility. If you've been listening to the albums this week ahead of today's show, what I'll do is I will invite each of our guests into Speaker's Corner, and they'll have the floor to persuade you that their album choice should be nominated as this week's winner. And then we'll do that in turn, and then there'll be a general studio discussion about all the albums that we've been listening to. And then in about 45 minutes' time, I'll be starting to persuade you, the viewers at home, to start voting, which you do simply by dropping a comment in the comments box or commenting on Facebook or Twitter. And my colleague Sophie will be keeping a tally. And so hopefully by the end of the show, we can designate one of our panelists as the winner, as you have chosen their album as this week's Album of the Week. So without further ado, let me begin by inviting my guests into the studio. I'm delighted to say that this week I have got four esteemed colleagues who have heroically volunteered to give up their lunch hour to come into the studio and persuade you that their album is the one that should win. And they're all from the Marketing, Outreach, Recruitment and Admissions team. So without further ado, my first guest, please welcome into the studio, Dave. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, Dan. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. How's life with you? All well?
Yes, thank you very much. Lovely day today, so makes a nice change.
And you're braced to persuade the viewers that your album should be this week's winner, I hope.
Well, I think I've got a pretty easy case to make here, because this is it. Donald Fagen's The Nightfly. A little bit of personal history behind this. First time I heard this, 1982, when it was released. It was actually recorded for me by my chemistry teacher. I myself am a chemistry teacher, so I don't know, make of that what you will. But so I mean, it's all I can say is you need to listen to this. If you know Steely Dan, you will know that Donald Fagen was one of the main writers for Steely Dan. And as they sort of grew within their musical journey, as it were, their music became more and more intricate, really. I guess you'd call it a jazz rock fusion. But by the time you get to 1982, Donald Fagen sort of doing a bit of work on his own. And for me, growing up listening to records, I was a bit of a nerd. So I used to look at all the various persons involved in the record, you know, who's the second engineer and all that stuff. So I'd gradually pick up knowledge about the recordings. And in fact, just before I came on, actually, I counted 35 different musicians on this record. And some of those are, again, for nerds like me, they're just phenomenal session players. Michael Brecker, Jeff Porcaro, Larry Colton, Steve Kahn, all these people, they are just, they're phenomenal session players in themselves. And I guess by this time when Donald Fagen released this record, he basically had the ability to call on the very best musicians that were out there. And like I said, the result, I think, is just one of the most phenomenal pieces of recorded music in the late 20th century. If of all the tracks to listen to, if you listen to Maxine, which is the fourth cut, the arrangement, the production values, it's just phenomenal, and it's what you might call a kind of light jazz piece. There's nothing too frenetic. There's no bebop here. This is just gentle jazz, and I just, as a piece of music, sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I think if I was ever invited onto Desert Island Discs, what would I take with me? I would say this has probably been on my list for the last 20 years. So there you go. If you haven't listened to it, folks, that's my pitch. I recommend it.
Terrific. Thank you very much. So there we are. Dave's recommendation is Donald Fagen's The Nightfly. A wonderful, yes, you're right, a wonderful kind of mixture of soft jazz, a little bit of pop rock thrown in. Wonderfully, that particular sort of sonic universe that he then carried on into Kamakiriad, the second album that followed, and so on. Yes, you're right. It's a particularly wonderful album. So I'm sure we'll come back to that. Oh, look, all the comments are starting to come in. Amazing album, indeed, it is. Chris, most of the best things were made in 1982.
I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, okay.
And Becky, hello, MORA colleagues. Looking forward to hearing your choices. Fantastic. And so thank you to the viewers already. Thank you very much for watching. And thank you to Dave for your nomination.
You're welcome.
So next into the studio, broadcasting live from the market town of Kings, no less. Please welcome Sue Hopkinson. Hello, Sue.
Hi, Dan. How are you? Nice to see you. The market town of Kings, indeed.
Yeah. And you're from the international office, aren't you? I don't know whether does Faversham count as suitably international at the moment?
I suppose it's down the A2, so sort of. Still in Kent, but you know.
Absolutely.
Our worlds have shrunk, so it's sort of international if you're looking outside Canterbury. But yeah, we're missing our international world at the moment. So.
That's right. Yeah. And finding as we are across the whole university community, finding new and creative ways of being able to carry on doing what we're doing.
Absolutely.
So, Sue, for us in the studio here and for the viewers at home, tell us what the album is that you've chosen and why you've chosen it, because yours is a particularly interesting, weighty choice, isn't it?
Yes, I had to cheat a bit, didn't I, Dan? And I had to ask permission to cheat. So for the other panellists today, it's all Dan's fault because he said yes. But basically, I had a really difficult choice. You know, I've got quite eclectic music taste, and when you go through your sort of history of what you liked when, it was just impossible really to choose sort of one album, I think, that really defined an era or a time for me. I've gone from, from Kids from Fame, which was on tape, which was one of my first tapes, to, Eurythmics and Erasure when I was growing up. I used to absolutely love them live. To, Culture Club, Stone Roses at University and The Cure, to sort of later discovery of stuff that I didn't grow up with, which was just before, probably around the time I was born, like the Eagles, Hotel California, and Carole King and Tapestry and things like that. And I thought, well, what's actually going to represent for me almost all the way through that? And I thought it's Motown for me. I absolutely love the Motown sound. And again, picking one album was difficult, so I cheated. And I've picked Motown Hits of Gold, which is a sort of retro series of about 8 albums that were published, I think, in 85, although they were reissued, I think, in 89. And I don't really think you can get hold of them easily now. There's lots of other compilations, but these are of a particular moment, but they take you through the whole sort of Motown journey from the early days through to stuff that you don't think of as Motown. You know, most of their artists, of course, are Black American, and then they went into a bit more softer stuff in the later years. But that's what I've chosen. Motown Hits of Gold, volumes 1 to 8.
I would like to share with you how you collected this anthology week by week.
Yeah, so I basically worked in Arthur Fox Fruit and Veg in Alfreton. Do you know it?
Not readily.
Okay. No, one day you can go and have a look. It was a self-selection fruit and veg shop. It was my Saturday job. And when I started, I'm not going to say what year it was because that gives it all away. I worked like all day. You had to get there early in the morning, put the potatoes outside. It was freezing, fingerless gloves, everything. And at the end of a, 9-10 hour shift, it felt like, I got 9 whole pounds in a little brown envelope. Oh my God, it was like gold dust. It was so exciting. So it didn't go very far, but it went further than it does now. So I spotted this series of albums in W.H. Smith and thought, that is it, they're the ones for me, and then had to save week by week. And I think to start with, W.H. Smith were really lovely, and they actually put them aside for me because I thought somebody else was going to buy them and then they won't have them. They actually put them aside, and I said, I'm going to come out. But I think my mum and dad helped me out and bought them, and then I had to pay them back, week by week, because I saved my money. So yeah, it is quite a sort of nice, in a way, memory that I've got of these albums, that they mean so much to you at that age, don't they? You know, that they're really your life. And I think I've got a bit of a thing about Motown because my best friend Julie Rossington introduced me to Motown. I'd never heard of it. Growing up in sort of semi-rural Derbyshire, it wasn't the kind of thing that all my mates were listening to. It wasn't anything that I'd really heard on the radio or anything like that. Julie Rossington's big sister was into it, and she taught me, you know, all about the different bands, and there's a little dance that you did to Motown. I'm not going to do that today, so don't worry. Oh. But it was great because nobody else was listening to it, so it was like a whole new world of discovery of all these classic artists that I now know and love, like Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, and Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, and the Commodores, and Edwin Starr, and it was absolute world away, and it just blew me away. It just had a sound. It really grabbed me, and I think that's why, you know, it's always stayed with me. So I loved it then. And then you've got this sort of superiority if nobody else is listening to it. Oh, you don't know it. Oh, okay. And then, you know, you'd have things like Nowhere to Run by Martha Reeves and Vandellas. That was featured in Good Morning Vietnam and Apocalypse Now. And it's like, oh, damn, people will hear it now and they'll start to like it well. And then, of course, there was the famous Levi 501 ad in about mid-80s with Nick Kamen. Stripping off and putting his jeans and his t-shirt in the washer with the Stones to shrink to fit. So, and that was Marvin Gaye heard it through the grapevine. And again, it was, you know, they pop up every now and again throughout history in terms of, you know, popularity. But Chris, maybe later. Let's say that till the end.
If your album wins,
I know I'm gonna have to do it, aren't I? I'm gonna have to do it. There's room in the study here. Maybe I can fit that in. But they really stayed with me, those songs. That they're not necessarily bands that people know. They just mean a lot to me. And the funny thing is, I think they're not exactly. The songs are quite depressing, actually. They're all about being left at the altar and being cheated on, and losing their love of their life and being heartbroken. Jimmy Ruffin, What Becomes of the Broken Hearted, all of these quite sad songs, really. But I don't know, they're sung with sort of quite a nice, it's that sort of sound, and they mean a lot, really, I think. So, they might be light pop, but they really sort of speak to me. So, and they've stayed with me throughout my life. So that's why they're so key. And I think, again, it's just a world away, this sort of Detroit of the sort of, 50s and 60s, and the sort of emergence of black music when there was still a lot of problems in the US and they were becoming really popular. It was quite a sort of hefty sort of, I think, championing of music at that time, really. So I think they do mean a lot. Oh, no way. Who said that? Nick came and went to my school? No way. And then I need to know who that is. Matt Simone, actually. Let's see. Oh. But yeah, it was a very glamorous world to me as a teenager in Derbyshire growing up. I thought it was just the place I wanted to be, sort of backing singers with the same outfit on, and all these sort of, 4 male groups that had the little routines and stuff. It just seemed, unbelievably glam, and just a sort of world I'd love to visit. So I think it hit me hard, and it stayed with me throughout.
It's that kind of wonderful thing that pop music does, isn't it? It's a form of
exactly. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sue, for sharing with us. Sue's nomination there for a mammoth compilation. Oh, and I see Dave is just a bit of subliminal advertising there, just so that the album isn't forgotten. Fantastic. So similar also because Dave, you're from Charlton, broadcasting from Charlton. Similarly from Charlton, a brace of people broadcasting from Charlton. Please welcome my colleague Sam into the studio. Sam, hello.
Hello, Dan. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
Pleasure, and thank you for giving up your lunch hour to come and extol the virtues of your chosen album, which is a bit of a Brit pop sensation, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I've chosen What's the Story, Morning Glory by Oasis, that was released in 1995. I've chosen it really for a number of reasons, but probably the age I was when it came out. I was about 11, 12. I got sent it in the post as a birthday present from a very cool uncle. He sent it to me on cassette. So I really wish I was able to hold it up like Dave's doing, but the fact is I only owned it on cassette. It came through the post with my birthday card or Christmas card, whatever it was that came through. And it is a brilliant album to own on cassette, because you don't want to skip any of the songs, and you don't need, because they are all, the entire album is full of just huge anthemic rock songs. It's a rock album of the Britpop era, as you say, Dan. And really, for me, being that age and kind of just starting secondary school around that time, it was that whole Britpop music of sort of the early to mid 90s really became, for me, almost like the social currency that people talked in. There was no divide in my class at school about what music people liked, because this brand of music was so popular in the 90s, in kind of like teenage years. That I'm thinking back now, every single person I knew listened to this music. Everyone at that age owned this album, and all the other Britpop bands, Blur, Pulp, Suede, all of them that had come sort of through the early 90s. And the reason I think I chose this one is because it was the real sort of zenith of that music scene, really. It was the album that just sold in millions and millions and millions of copies. I was looking it up this morning. I think it was the biggest British selling album of the 90s. And I think the 5th biggest selling album in the UK ever to date. I think beaten by, Queen's Greatest Hits, ABBA's Greatest Hits, Sgt. Pepper's, and an Adele album. So 2 of those are Greatest Hits albums. They've only got 2 albums that have actually outsold it as sort of standalone album. And I was sort of thinking, why did it sell so much? It wasn't just people of my age, of that teenage years, that were buying it. It really crossed over into kind of the mums and dads that were buying it as well. And I think that a lot of to do with that was the lineage it had with the influence from the 60s, from the Beatles, certainly from early 70s glam rock. I mean, Oasis were actually I covered a Slade song as a B-side around this time as well. I think that gave it a real connection to a slightly older generation. And that whole Britpop music scene of the 90s, real reaction against the real sort of heavy rock of the early 90s, like Nirvana and Soundgarden, bands like that were very American influenced. And this sort of Britpop music came through, and it really gave people a sort of harping back. A lot of nostalgia was tied up with Britpop, I think, thinking back to sort of perceived glory years of the 60s and early 70s. And that's, I think, really why this album sold so much and why it did so well at the time and still continues to sell well now. And I think as well, there's a real collective experience in listening to this album. This is the album to listen to in the car with friends. It's the album on the road trip. It's the album at the festival. It's those big choruses, that huge guitar sound. It's those big sing-along moments. It's that well, which I think really drove the popularity of the album. It's a very mass appeal album. It's not kind of a small album that you kind of discover and you love because it's very maybe creative or breaking new ground. I think it's an album that really appealed to a real mass audience. And the reason for that, of course, is the great songwriting that's on it. Of course, all the songs written by Noel Gallagher, the lead writer of Oasis. Liam Gallagher, the lead singer, didn't contribute anything at this point in the band history. It was Oasis's second album. Their first album is actually a lot heavier, to be honest. I think this album is also a little bit more wistful. It's not as snarly. It's not as swaggery. It's not as arrogant as their first album or their third album, which followed this. Cocaine-infueled mess of 9-minute long songs, really. But this album really hit a time in the 90s where I think it was really sort of tapping into a bit of nostalgia for the 60s and the early 70s. And it was about promoting British life and reflecting British life in music, as opposed to a lot of the American stuff that had come before. I think some real standout tracks. I mean, Wonderwall is now a classic. I was re-listening to the album the other day, and I think Don't Look Back in Anger really stands out as well. Of course, recently adopted by after the Manchester bombing a couple of years ago, it became a song that really brought people together again. So I mean, this is just an album of songs that you will know, even if you've probably not heard the album before. If you listen to it, you'll think, "Oh yeah, I've heard that before. I've heard that song," because you will have just heard it on the song on the radio a lot. And I think that's wherein that Britpop, this album really represents the top of Britpop. I mean, it really started to die down into the late 90s. But this album, 95 into 96, sums up a real time in British society, a real time in British life. I think it's easy to get too carried away with the nostalgia side of Britpop. A lot of it was tied up with this idea of Cool Britannia that kind of came in when Tony Blair was elected, but that was much more in the late 90s. A lot of remember the people who are writing these songs and recording these music, they all grew up in the 80s and the early 90s, when sort of the economy was tough, Thatcher's Britain. There's this dichotomy with, music is quite nostalgic, but at the same time, it's not very always very complimentary. It's quite, I think, honest about how hard life is in Britain, or was for these people. I mean, the Gallagher brothers grew up in Moss Side in Manchester, a very deprived area. It's about a little bit of escapism in the lyrics as well. But combined with these huge, there's so much melody on the album. It's just huge, catchy rock songs. I feel to that time, and I think it's very easy to get nostalgic about them. And really stands up. I think the guitar sound is quite timeless. I think it doesn't feel like something that was made 25 years ago. It feels, you can put it on now. It's a great summer album. As the clock's going forward, lighter evening, put it on, nice cider in the garden. It's that type of album to enjoy. But I think that's really why I've chosen it and I've picked it. It sums up not just the nostalgia side, but it really sums up that collective experience. I'd urge everyone to do it. And I wish I was able to hold up my cassette that I had sent by my uncle in 1995, but it's long gone, I'm afraid. That was my entry into music as an 11-year-old, starting secondary school. This album, this was it. This was the and if you want to slice the back, go listen to it.
And there we are, the only road trip to the Lake District. And what a wonderful album to have in the car and accompanying you all the way up to the Lake District. Thank you, Sam. Yes, I think having, listening back to the album when everyone's choices came in, I realised that there isn't a lesser song on the album, or the equivalent of a weaker song, is there? They're all big anthemic rock songs all throughout, and so it doesn't really put a foot wrong. And I think perhaps in part that's why, as you say, it's one of the most successful and top 5 selling albums in the UK of all time. So indeed. So thank you, Sam, for nominating What's the Story Morning Glory by Britpop sensation Oasis. And so my last guest this afternoon, coming into the virtual studio, viewers, to compete for your votes at home, it wins the prize for broadcasting from the furthest distance from campus. Please welcome in studio Karen. Karen, hello.
Hello.
So you're broadcasting from Chatham, aren't you?
Yes.
So you win the prize for the most easterly. It's probably about as most international as we've been able to get to in lockdown. So, Karen, welcome into the studio. So again, let's move you into Speaker's Corner. So you have the floor. So tell us and the viewers at home the album that you've chosen and why it is that you've chosen it.
So I've chosen Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears. It was the first proper album that I owned. My brother bought both of their albums as they came out, and he's 15 years older than me. And I think he got fed up with me pinching his tapes from him. So he asked me which of the two I like better, and I said this one, and he let me have it. And it's just been a constant companion across the years for me. My taste in music changed a few times down the years, but this album and the Tears for Fears in general have been a constant all the way through. I've always liked them. I've always loved this album. It's such a powerful collection of songs. It's I call it basking music, because you can kind of put it on and lean back and close your eyes and just let all the sounds wash over you. And you've got sort of driving pop with Everybody Wants to Rule the World, and then there's the kind of big sing-along anthem with Shout. We've got some quieter moments with like I Believe, which is like a very sort of raw vocal, and then at the end as well, sort of waving goodbye to the album is Listen, which is sort of an odd little thing, but it just gives you a little bit of a breather after all of the sort of powerful tunes that came before it, especially with the sort of the like combination on that sort of second half of the album where you've got Broken, which is a really sort of up rocky tune, which feeds into Head Over Heels, which feeds back into a live version of Broken again, and it's all very kind of big and powerful, and you got that big sort of la 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 sing along bit in the middle of Head Over Heels as well. And when you're listening to it through earphones, which I did a lot growing up because I had to listen to it through my Walkman, because my dad, anything after 1950, my dad declared was delinquent stuff. So you couldn't have any sort of pop music on in the house when he was around. So my brother brought me back a Walkman because he was in the Navy as well. He brought me back things from overseas, and he brought me back this Walkman that was like a brick. It took 4 AA batteries, but I used to spend hours just listening to that, and Songs from the Big Chair was just in there a lot, and it got chewed loads of times, but it still played, and I still loved it, and I still love it today, and I still listen to it very, very often. And that, like that, the end of Broken live as well, where you hear the crowd scream. It was always a dream to be one of those people in the crowd shouting and screaming at the end of that song. And I finally got the chance to do that in 2017 when they played Royal Albert Hall.
Oh, wow.
And it was my first time at the Royal Albert Hall. And they hadn't played the UK for a really long time. So the whole place was packed to the rafters and everyone was super up for it. And the whole atmosphere of the whole show was just amazing. And they're fantastic live. And then you've also got sort of the kind of vocal gymnastics of Roland Orzabal. He can do everything from sort of low, soft vocals through to sort of hard-edged, through to really ridiculously high-pitched, which you can hear on Listen at the end, where he's doing these kind of high-pitched and then his voice melds really well with Kurt Smith's voice, who's got a kind of a similar voice, but he's only really got that same one soft edge thing, but their two voices really mesh really well together. And you can, when you listen through earphones, you can really hear all the different layers within the song, and all the different sounds that make up some of the songs are real kind of soundscapes. So you've got piano and you've got guitar, you've got all different synth sounds going on, but it all kind of weaves together to make this amazing sort of soundscape, and that you can just get lost in and sing along to and just really, really enjoy. So that's why I've picked it. It's just such a iconic album for me.
Fantastic.
I've always loved.
And obviously touched a chord as well with some of the viewers. Obviously, there's what's interesting about this week's show is that it's really tapping into the tactile nature of the albums, isn't it? Dave was talking about having the Nightfly on vinyl. Sam, you were talking about being given it on cassette. Karen, you two having it on cassette as well, and Sue, the 8 LP marathon collection that you amassed each week. It's really tapping into the physicality of things as well as kind of musical memories that we have. So thank you to Karen for sharing her nomination, which is Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears. And last into the studio, not competing for your vote at home, viewers, but here to share her encyclopedic knowledge of pop music and her pop punditry, please welcome into the studio my colleague Sophie. Sophie, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So Sophie, as you do each week, I know you've been diligently listening along to all the albums chosen by our guests this week. How was it for you?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I have a relationship with every single one of these albums. I owned all of them. Well, maybe not all 8 vinyls like Sue of the Motown, but I have had multiple versions of Motown my whole life. And it's been so interesting going back into them and listening to them, see whether they stand up. One of the things me and Dan often talk about is, when you revisit something that you loved as a younger person and then looking at it with your kind of musical radar and how you dissect it and everything, and does it stand up? And a few weeks ago where I talked about one that I didn't. There was an album we had done, and I didn't want to go anywhere. And it was Kate Bush, was it, or something like that? And I was like, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to unpick it and just leave it as a little gem. And to be honest, I feel like that about the Tears for Fears. I didn't actually own that album, but my best friend when I was a teenager had it, and it was just a soundtrack of a summer. Do you know when you get those kind of albums and you know every word and all that kind of thing? I mean, I was never really a massive Tears for Fears fan, but it's just all the albums, I think, except the Donald Fagen, which is a bit of a rarity. Not many people know it. The other three are just gargantuan anthemic albums, aren't they? They're just everywhere. I mean, the What's the Story, Morning Glory, I had that when I was at university. I think my then boyfriend gave it to me again. In the Battle of the Britpop, I came down on the side of Blur, but I still had this album. It was the one I had, and I remember listening to it a lot when I lived in Leeds. And the one thing I thought when I was listening to it again, I was like, hold on, there's a quote in that first song. Who's that? And you go, oh, it's Gary Glitter. It's good to be back. And you're like, oh, no. Oops, you know, with all these kind of, and the other thing I thought initially, and it's really funny you mentioned them doing a cover of this later. I was thinking, gosh, listening to it again, Liam Gallagher does sound a bit like Noddy Holder. So, I mean, you can't, albums like that are so massive and so of the time, you can't really go in and unpick them, can you? In a kind of any. It doesn't seem terribly fair. And Motown, I mean, what do you do with Motown? I mean, it's the only thing I know. But the one thing I will say, some lovely gentleman out there has created a Spotify playlist of these 8 albums. And it goes from the sublime to, I'm afraid, Feel the Rhythm of the Night by DeBarge. It's the last one. I know. Which is utterly terrible, apart from when they use it for comedic value in the all-female Ghostbusters. That's very funny, but it gets used then. But yeah, Donald Fagen is just an absolute little jewel for me. That's one of my brother introduced me to the album. He used to be a bar manager in a bar in Glasgow, and when I was on vacation, I'd go and work behind the bar for him. And I remember Ruby coming on the sound system and just going, what's that song? Oh my God. So this would have been about, I don't know, 88. So 6 years after it came out, I instantly ran out and bought the album on vinyl. And it's just been in my playlist ever since, in a way that the other 3 haven't. So, bit of a bias there. Sorry, folks.
Go for it.
It's obviously, it's I love Motown in the 60s, but it doesn't have quite the same quality as the Nightfly. I mean, I think as I was saying,
I might have to come back.
How mistaken.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that Dave, I think you and I were talking about before we came on air, wasn't it? It's the sound world of that Donald Fagen album is really, and I think Sophie, you mentioned it too when we were sort of listening to it. It has a particular quality to it that puts you in mind of that, Lester the Nightfly, the song that's about the nighttime broadcaster. Please respect the 7-second delay, and he's got his booze and his Chesterfield Kings in to see him through the show, but then it turns out that the song is just him pining for the lost love of his life and so on. So there's a wonderful kind of wry nostalgia to it. Which
it's a pining for the 50s, I think. There's a little insert in the album that says, this album is, I think, something like dedicated to somebody of roughly my height and size, growing up in a northeastern city in the 50s, and it's pure nostalgia for him, but he carries over something that Steely Dan always had as well, which is that there's that sort of little slightly cynical edge to everything they say. It's not, on the surface, the music is beautiful, the harmonies, everything absolutely beautiful. If you listen to the lyrics, sometimes they can be a sort of, just a little hint of the dystopian about it.
Yeah.
So
That's true. I mean, the Kamakiria, the album that came out later, the Tomorrow's Girls, is sort of being invaded by an alien race of amazingly beautiful women who then end up kind of burning you to a frazzle or something, because it turns out to be a prelude to invasion or something.
Yeah.
So,
And then he woke up. Yeah, exactly.
There is that one. But then, Sophie, you were saying how one of your favourite songs is "Walk Between the Raindrops."
Oh, I know. Just what a lovely picture is that? Walk between the raindrops back to your room, isn't it? And it's just so upbeat and lovely. And it feels like a very late teenage rite de passage kind of era in some young man's life. Like Maxine, move up to the city, fill the place with friends, all that. It's so well painted, lovely lines that just encapsulate. Often I bleat on about this all the time, I'm sorry folks, but just when lyrics are like poetry and just within a line you've got an instant image and mood or something in your head. Great songsmithing. Sorry folks, we're just bleating on about Donald Fagen.
But one of the because I always like to look for similarities between choices each week to see if there is one, and in fact there were two. There was both the Nightfly and songs from the Big Chair, and indeed also the Oasis album, Sam, that you chose. They were almost so successful that it took a while for the bands then to be able to regroup to release another album. And it's interesting that sometimes albums are so successful that it takes, because there was, I think I'm looking it up, it took 4 years for Tears for Fears to then manage to sort of regroup to release the album that came next. And Dave, you were saying earlier that Donald Fagen, it didn't release another album for another sort of, I can't remember how long it took after Kamakiria. There was at least a decade or something, wasn't it?
At least a decade, yeah, about 93 maybe, yeah, something like that.
That's right, and similarly, Sam, the album came out of a bizarrely destructive period, didn't it, between the Gallagher brothers? But then it ended up being this huge commercial success.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the album they did eventually release after this one, it became so huge after What's the Story, Morning Glory came out, and all they did after '96, huge with massive shows in Epworth in the summer of '96. But they really should have taken the next year off. I think the record company pressure made them then record their next album in '97, and it's just awful. I mean, it's almost unlistenable. It's about 75 minutes long of just these overblown rock extended songs. Yeah, they should, as you say, they should have just taken some time and taken a bit of a gap like the other artists did, but it was just, they were just so big so quickly that it all sort of unraveled sort of into the 90s.
And that's one of the things that I'm reading about the Donald Fagen was that he felt he'd almost given too much of himself. He'd been so confessional in the album that it was actually a case that he needed some time just to sort of regroup and recover himself, because he'd given so much away in the lyrics to that album.
He was also just a tremendous perfectionist. There's a story I saw about Larry Colton, the guitar player, who came over to do the sessions on the East Coast, and he turned up on the plane with his guitar, assuming he'd use one of the amps, in New York or on the East Coast. But Donald Fagen said, no, I want the sound you had on a particular album when you played through a Fender amp. So I think the story goes that they arranged for Larry Carlton's Fender amp to be flown first class over to the East Coast. He was that kind of perfectionist.
Good Lord. And it was... And that album was recorded at a time when the 32-track recorder was the new thing, wasn't it? And suddenly there were all the different recording possibilities that it afforded. You weren't limited in the way that you had been before. And I think you can really tell, can't you, that I like albums that are all about sort of sonic exploration. And, in weeks past, we've had albums by the Beatles, and it's been about exploring things in the studio. And that was very much a feature of Donald Fagen's explorations. What was it like for you, Karen, when you found yourself in the live audience in 2017, experiencing the band live?
Oh, it was fantastic. I've always wanted to see them live, and they just hadn't played in the sort of time when I'd been going to gigs. They just hadn't played at all, and there was also a big gap where Kurt Smith wasn't around. It was just Roland Orzabal on his own. But to see them back together and in somewhere as amazing as the Royal Albert Hall, the whole place was just completely alive that evening, and it was such a fantastic show.
And did they? Because often bands perform exactly as they performed on the album because they know that the fans turn up to hear the songs in the way that they heard the songs from the recording. Were they that kind of band, or was it much? Was it different? Was it much more about the live experience?
No, they pretty much do recreate the songs as you hear them. Mm-hmm. On the albums. They do a good mixture of all of their albums as well. Not so much the ones that Roland Orzabal did by himself, although they do one or two songs from that period. They mostly focus on the ones where both of them were involved. But yeah, it's very good. But the only thing I didn't like was the fact that they walk on to Lord's version of Everybody Wants to Rule the World, which I think I really don't like. But they love it. They're really supportive of new artists and of people who want to cover or sample their music. They've got a Spotify playlist of people who've covered or sampled their songs.
Oh, nice.
And they love Lord's version, and that's why they walk out to it.
Because I mean,
good royalties.
Good royalties, absolutely. But I mean, 1982 was, looking at the other albums that came out that year, there are some big hitters. You've got Hounds of Love by Kate Bush, which Sophie and I had as a listening party a few weeks ago. You've got Princes Around the World in the Day. You've got Dire Straits' Brother in Arms, and you've got The Cure's Head on the Door. So, there were some real big hitters competing, and it's quite interesting that Tears for Fears, managed to hold off that competition and did successfully when the competition was pretty fierce. Excellent. Yeah. Good. And similarly, Sam, you're in 1995. You've got Great Escape by Blur. You've got Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. You've got Post, which is the Yerk album that Sophie and I often play, and you've got the Bends, the second album by Radiohead. So again, there's a lot of heavyweights with which What's the Story was contending at the time, weren't there?
Yeah, absolutely, and sort of. And that's why I kind of was asking myself, why did this album really cut through? Why did it sell so much more? Because, I mean, the Bends is amazing. I mean, all those albums just meant amazing. Yeah. I love Radiohead. As similar to you, Sophie, I was actually, like you said, Sophie, more on the Blur side. But I mean, everyone had this album. It was just everywhere. And as more people heard it, and it just keeps selling and selling and selling. Yeah. I really do think it was that nostalgic aspect of Britpop, or that perceived nostalgia, playing influence from the sort of 60s Beatles, Rolling Stones, early 70s glam rock sound that was coming through, that really appealed it to the wider audience, the slightly older audience as well. But yeah, it was a very rich time.
I assume that was a conscious decision on their part to then deliberately dial into that. I mean, things like Don't Look Back in Anger, I assume, is totally quoting that famous play and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Don't Look Back in Anger is a really good example, because the opening chord sequence is virtually imagined by John Lennon, I think, with one extra note added. So, I mean, they were very close to the line in terms of where it was influenced and where it was ripping off. And they were getting criticized quite heavily, I think, at the time. Yeah. I think looking at the album overall, I think there's enough originality in it. I mean, you mentioned before.
Cool.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was just so much influence in the 60s, 70s. Where was it was they were treading that line very thinly, but I think overall it's enough.
They got away with it.
They got away with it, and was in fact, and then it kind of self-perpetuated that scene itself. It then became. They had politicians jumping on the bandwagon and using it as a nostalgic thing, even though the songs themselves aren't particularly complimentary about British life. That was the problem with what Britpop became eventually. It became slightly hijacked. Really,
That's right.
But the music itself from the early 90s up until 95 is very good.
It's extraordinary. It's a real phenomenon, that album, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's very difficult to argue with the sheer longevity of the Motown factory that you chose. Berry Gordy's empire is, if you just look at the 8 LP marathon when we were working through the track listing on Spotify. I mean, it is a veritable powerhouse of huge names, isn't it? That are just Diana Ross and the Supremes, Stevie Wonder's on there, Smokey Robinson. I mean, you look at it and you think it really is quite an astonishing litany of just colossal hits. It's almost very difficult to argue against the success of Motown.
Oh yeah, I think it's very difficult. It's a very different choice to a one album and a particular sort of mood you're in at a particular time, because it went through several decades really. But it's not without its problems either, because there was a lot of criticism of I think you said the machine, didn't you? You said factory.
Yeah.
Quite accurate, because it's come to light that they worked in quite difficult conditions. They weren't treated very well. A lot of the young girl bands didn't make very much money. So even though it was sort of championing black music at a time when there were obviously still segregation in some parts of the US, they weren't actually treated that well either from their own race as well. So it's quite problematic in some ways, but then again, it launched so many massive bands, and not always their best known hits with Motown. I think Stevie Wonder obviously went on to different labels, and I don't think Superstition's on any of those, which is one of my favourite Stevie Wonder tracks. I think that's with a different label. So it's sort of, in a way, quite nice to have that sort of underlying it, because then it launched people off into different careers as well. But yeah, it's a powerful sound. It's a bit of a blast, isn't it? And it's a particular time. So when you're talking about the albums, the others have chosen, and about perhaps harking back to these scenes, well, these are the original ones that a lot of these songs hark back to. So I've just gone for the original.
Yeah, and the best.
Well, I wouldn't like to say that, but by default, of course, that's what I meant.
But I mean, yes, I mean, it was about, I think was Motown, and Berry Gordy's was his what's the word I'm looking for? He crafted them in such a way as, he had the dance routines and the look and the fashion and the styling, didn't he? And everything they did was really well choreographed and precisely mapped out and so on. So it was one of the first instances of actually thinking about them as a product and what they would look like visually and how they would be on stage and so on, in a way that set the tone for, countless acts that have followed since.
Yeah. So, and again, it's sort of, within all these artists and the work that we were talking about, there are people behind it who are not obviously the artists. So again, very different kind of choice to what the others have chosen, where it is very much about that artist, and they've written the songs and they've produced it, and they might have brought in other collaborators like with Donald Fagen, but there's a machine behind a lot of these that started them and launched them. And again, it'll be a personal choice whether you think that's a good thing to vote for then. But it's more, for me, it's not the sort of the politics and the thing behind it. It's more just the recreation of a mood and an era and what it means to me that's so powerful, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we draw near the end of the show, viewers at home, this is a time when I start enthusing you to vote for the album of your choice. Which album that each of our guests has presented has managed to convince me with their product placements. We've got Dave's nomination with Donald Fagen's The Nightfly. We've got Karen asking you to vote for songs from the big chair by Tears for Fears. We've got Sam's Brit pop heavyweight, What's the Story, Morning Glory. And then we've got Sue's untouchable Motown Hits of Gold, volumes 1 to 8.
That's an M for Motown. You can't see it. An M for Motown, okay? Just remember, M for Motown, okay?
I think we've got to divide that one by 8, haven't we?
Divide it by 8.
Absolutely, and I can see that the product placement and actually being able to wield the product itself has become quite a theme in this week's show.
I think all my 8 albums are up in Derbyshire at my mum and dad's. So, at the grand old age of 49, I've still got my record player and all my albums, at my parents'. So there you go. Next time.
But I think that was the lovely thing about the story that you told, Sue, about the albums, was that it was very much linked into you having a Saturday job. And one of the things I think Sophie and we've talked about this before, isn't it? That with the Spotify and the digital and the streaming age, you don't sort of, youngsters don't have that pleasure of saving up for the record and going down to buy. I remember buying LPs in Boots and Woolworths.
Pick a mix counter and then the records, next door. So you could get your 10-penny mix at the same time.
Absolutely.
Well, you said that you found out about these Motown albums on telly. It was an advert. So my version of that, which I also bought in Woolies, was the Beach Boys. There were 2 albums with these what would now be very questionable covers, which was the rear end of a woman bikini, bum in a bikini. Volume 1, it was a yellow bikini bottom, and Volume 2 was a red bikini bottom. All kind of airbrushed, really random. But
the other one I thought about that I nearly put forward, again, it's cheating again, and I wouldn't have expected you to listen to all of those, was the Now albums. Now, yes. The number 1, I think, was 85, and it was an absolute classic. But yeah, I wouldn't expect you to listen to all of those.
No.
So there's probably about 100 they're like 100.
They're still ongoing.
It sounds as though, Sophie, we should be quite pleased that you don't have those 2 volumes to wave at the camera this afternoon.
Yes, I know. And no, I'm not going to reenact it either. You'll be glad to know.
Well, I'm not forgetting, of course, that Sue's going to do the Motown Shuffle should she win this week. So.
I think I'm quite safe in not winning, thank goodness. So I'm all right.
Oh, you never know.
Never know.
There we are. Saturday again, and we're on the picnic.
Excellent. Cheers for Piers. We have a graphic. Excellent.
Keep going, Karen. There we are. Look, from the big chair. There it is, being waved.
Excellent. You want to.
And it's interesting how for all of us here assembled this week that the nostalgia is linked both to the sound of the music and the memories associated with it, and the actual physicality of the object itself.
Yeah.
Sam's coming up with the digital equivalent. There we go.
We're all doing it now. I can't find mine.
There we are. Motown Chocolate Christmas party. There we are. Sue.
I'm trying to find it now.
Is that a
vote? It's there.
Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
Nice.
I'm going to take that.
Slightly inappropriate dancing and thigh shot as well. It's not me.
Oh dear. So then, who will you be voting for? Is it for Tears for Fears? Is it for Oasis? Is it for the Motown juggernaut? Or is it for Donald Fagen? So by all means, in the comments, in whichever platform you're viewing at the moment, drop your vote in. And we will start taking a tally. What's the story morning from?
There we go. There's one.
There we are. There we are. The vote for Sam. So, Sophie, this is where you're keeping the tally.
Yes, I am. 1 tick. Oh, solid as
the rock on the
I love that song.
Oh dear, oh me, Karen. Oh, there we are.
Tears for Fears.
So I don't know, Michael, if you're still watching, whether we can count yours as a.
Yes, as a Nightfly.
Would that be a vote for Donald Fagen? Do we think?
Yes, it is. Yes.
I think it's a minus for me. Can we have it like? Is it QI where you win if you get minus points?
Well, you're going to be like Ollie Double, and who was it last week? We have the anti-winner who gets no votes at all. The other 3 come in, get 1 or 2 the same. The draw.
That's right. It's the sort of
winner. Okay. I'm all right with that.
It's the sort of punk thing of winning by not winning and deliberately not.
I told you, I don't like it when everybody else likes it.
Second vote for Tears for Fears.
Another vote for Sarah for Tears for Fears.
Ahead by a nose.
Nice.
You're not going to get the pulse.
Thanks, Russ.
There's Ellie Scott.
Ellie's voting for the Nightfly.
Yeah,
well done.
Thank
This
you,
is
next door.
exciting. Oh,
Yes.
there's one.
Another one in the back. Sam there.
Oh.
Naomi. What's the story? Morning Glory.
We've got a
90s.
three-way tie again. Oh, no, we haven't.
Oh.
Here we go. There we go.
Our shout is for
Tears
Tears
for Fears
Yeah.
are running on 3. Donald Fagen on 2. Oasis on 2. Motown on 1, folks.
Oh, Tears for
Oh,
Fears.
yeah.
Oh, have we got a runaway winner on our hands here, folks? Who knows?
Oh, Oasis.
Oh, Oasis.
Oh.
Back.
4-3, 4-3.
Come on,
Tears
where's
for
the
Fears,
old
nudging
timers?
ahead. Oh, 5-3,
Oh.
5.
The voting is turning into a white knuckle ride. This is quite something.
Yes.
Oh.
Thank you, Friffer. Thank you.
Is that like one vote or is that
No,
two?
that's just Friffer. That's just one.
Oh, I just thought it might be. Can you just vote on for Rob as well? Can you? You vote for Rob.
Naughty.
Yes.
Come on,
I'll
Ola.
vote for Tears for Fears. Here we are. Good Lord.
If
Who's
I was
going to be caught between the landslide this week?
No, very good. Very good.
Family loyalty and just good music taste.
Yeah.
That's
Dave
my goal.
Moore. Hello, Dave.
Oh,
Oasis
If I wasn't here pushing Tears for Fears, then I would vote for Oasis because that was the album I was playing to death when I met my partner. So it's full of the warm and fuzzies for me.
Oh, how lovely.
Rob likes them too, so it is one vote, but would be another vote for Rob too. Another vote from Christine.
Oh, look at this.
Oh.
I think we have a kind of runaway winner by the looks
I'm
of
really
it.
surprised actually. I thought Oasis would wipe the floor, to be honest.
Mm.
Good Lord. So, Sophie, fill us in with the score. Oh, wait a minute. Another one in. Maria, Oasis.
Thank you, Maria. Never mind.
You get the affection, but Sam, you get
Yeah,
the
I get the love.
vote. So,
No,
Sophie, how does that leave things at the moment then?
In reverse order, coming in fourth with 1 vote is Sue with Motown. In third place is Dave with Donald Fagen on 2 votes. And then second with 6 votes is Oasis. Sorry, Sam.
Oh.
So with 7 votes,
Oh,
Tears
well,
for Fears.
And another
comes
one. There you
in.
go.
Oh, there we go. There's another one. So that makes it 8. A clear winner. Well done.
Looks as
Well
though
done,
we-
Karen.
We
Well
do
done,
have to
Karen.
declare, Karen, you are this week's Album of the Week winner with Tears for Fears.
Karen, is there a Tears for Fears dance?
Oh, yes. Come on, someone put it on.
I'm sorry, 18.
That's it's in the video to Mad World, I think. Roland Orzabal doesn't do much
yeah,
singing,
that's
so he
right,
stands
he
on
did
the
all
end of a
that funny
pier doing this
stuff,
kind of
doesn't he?
thing.
There you
And
go.
my memory is he's by a duck pond or something.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, the virtual applause is ringing round, Karen. Even though we can't hear it, it's coming in as we speak. There we are.
I'm really surprised that Oasis didn't win, actually. And I'm surprised that Donald Fagen didn't get more, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm not surprised that Motown didn't. But the others I'm really surprised at.
Well, I think Motown is the timeless musical backdrop against which everything else unfolds.
Absolutely.
Yes,
I
I
don't
think that-
need votes for vindication. I don't know.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to all my guests this week. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you, viewers at home, for watching and commenting and for sharing your views and for the deluge of votes that came in. So it just remains for me to say thank you to my colleagues Sophie and to Sam and to Karen and to Sue and to Dave and to everyone for watching and to congratulate Karen again on winning this week's Album of the Week winner with Tears for Fears. It just remains for me to say a very big thank you to everyone here from the music department. We will be back next week with the next week's episode. So from me, do stay safe and well, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much for watching.